Someone said that I should wave to engage with the audience, to take all the nerves away. So I'm going to wave, and then I'll go into it. Thank you, perfect. Physarum polycephalum. So this is also known as slime mold. Scientists discovered this funky yellow single-celled organism is pretty good at making decisions. So what they did was they placed food sources in locations relative to cities around Tokyo, and then added slime molds to see what would happen. So the slime molds spread out, and they detected locally for nutrients, repellents, making local decisions about which direction they would go in search of food next. And over time, what they saw was a network of nutrient-carrying tubes that looked remarkably similar to the Tokyo subway. And in some places, it was more efficient. So slime molds created a complex and efficient network independently and without a central decision maker. But this is QCon, so why am I telling you this? Well, architectural decisions are often centralized, sometimes from an ivory tower. And I think we want to see if we can learn from slime molds. So before we do that, I'm going to take you on a journey. So our journey started back in 2020. It was in the midst of the COVID pandemic, and we were wrestling with another problem you've all probably dealt with. A legacy solution with multiple code lines, mixed versions of .NET, and different libraries and packages scattered around. We had manual deployment, so we were manually deploying our solution with Windows installers, copying files, prone to error, manual changes to environments. And ultimately, it meant a slow lead time. So we were going into 3 to 6 month release cycles, UAT, cycles of bug fixing, and we just weren't delivering any value to our customers. So we set out on a goal. And our goal was to re-architect to a cloud-native SaaS platform and adopt some modern engineering practices. And for this journey, I was lucky to pair with Andrew, who we saw earlier, and our track host, who joined us and showed us a new way of doing architecture. But first of all, we started on Zoom to have a conversation about the books we'd been reading. And the first book that, I'm not sure if it was Andrew or I, waved excitedly in front of the webcam was Team Topologies. So we set about setting up our teams for fast flow. So we had 3 product engineering teams. We had an enabling team. So this was a team of SMEs and experts that would support our product engineering teams. And then a platform team. Now, the platform team at the beginning was a re-platforming team, but that then turned into our platforming team that now supports our engineering teams and reduces the cognitive load for them. The next book was Accelerate. I'm sure all of you have read this one, but just to remind you, there's 24 key capabilities that were highlighted based on the research that DORA did. And the 2 that I think are important for this story are the loosely coupled architecture and empowered teams. So to support fast flow in the teams, we needed a loosely coupled architecture that we could spread across those teams. And we wanted to empower our teams to solve problems in the best way that they could. And this is where the advice process came in. So if anyone follows the ThoughtWorks tech radar, they'll know that the advice process has just entered the quadrant under techniques in trial, I believe. And so we needed to think about architecture in a slightly different way. We needed to have a process that would support our empowered teams and our streamlined teams. So the advice process says that any team can make any decision they need to, as long as they have sought the advice from all meaningfully affected parties and those with expertise, and that they record these publicly alongside reasons for going against it if necessary, so pros and cons. So it's that simple. But there are tools that sit underneath the advice process, tools that we use, and some of these you'll have heard of, and we'll go through it in a little bit more detail. But before we do that, we're going to take a slight detour, and Eleanor's going to talk to you about something that we lovingly call the context wars, and how we went about splitting up our platform across the teams.
So our product engineering team, we have started with 3 of them, and we inherited and shared a 15-year-old legacy platform written in mostly old technologies and different architectural styles. And in some of them, we also have single-tenant desktop tools. As Pete mentioned, our goal was to move to a cloud-native multi-tenant SaaS platform and change our ways of working to improve our software delivery performance while doing that. So in order to enable the team to work independently, but also to improve the fast flow, we needed an approach so they can understand the whole system, but on another side, to be able to identify loosely coupled business areas within that system on which they can start work independently. So we created a context map. What is a context map? In a short definition, it is a diagram or just a visualization of all the areas within the system and the contracts and relationship between them. How do we create our context map? We did that by applying the domain-driven design principles and identify loosely coupled business focus area that are known as bounded contexts. And we map the relationship and contracts between those contexts. And with that, we have the context map. The next step was to assign ownership for each of those bounded contexts. We did that by defining which of the team will be responsible for each of that bounded contexts. What that responsibility means? It means that the team will be responsible for any re-architecturing, any new feature development that will be happening within that context. But on another side, also, any new bug that will come from that area will be the team's responsibility to be fixed. And this sounds really straightforward and easy, but it wasn't like that. For us to define a context map for a legacy system as ours that and still have a lot of complex dependencies and contracts between different areas, it is really challenging. We didn't want it only to identify like loosely coupled areas within our system. We wanted them to be aligned with the business flow, so everyone in the company can use the context map. Not only the engineers, but also the QAs, the product, everyone who wanted to gain a general understanding of the software architecture and also to which different parts are who teams is owning it. Context map definition is not one single step work. It needs to be reviewed a couple of times, and you need to do that constantly in order to be sure that that alignment is met. And even we have reviewed our context map a couple of times, we still have gray areas and shared context. What are gray areas? Those are parts in the system that does not have a clear ownership or cannot be identified as independent bounded context, or cannot be seen as a part of existing bounded context. And on the other side, we have shared context, and those are contexts that are shared between different teams, or maybe between all of the teams. The context map itself, and together with these gray areas and the shared context, sometimes can become a source of frustration for the team. And it can create, as we are calling them, context map wars. And those are especially happening when some complex urgent bug arises and it is somewhere in the shared area or in the gray context. But the context map itself came with a lot of benefits from us. To define all the complex dependencies between the different bounded contexts will empower the team to be fully aware of the impact of their decision. So whenever they need to make some decision or change within their bounded context, by reviewing the context map, they will be fully aware what will be the impact, which bounded context will be affected, which team they need to ask or collaborate with, and that will lead to more collaborative decision-making process, but also will motivate the team, and they will start to think, can we remove some of those dependencies? And that will lead to more loosely coupled architecture. The gray areas in the shared context are a great insight that those parts of the system need some re-architecturing. So it's really important to identify them, and whenever you're struggling to identify a clear context or clear relationship between the context, you need to those areas to be marked as a technical debt and to prioritize their resolving, because as soon as you do that, that will make everyone's life easier. The context map itself will bring the ownership of the teams. They will start to build that ownership for their assigned context, and they will start to work independently. And when the teams start working independently, they will also be in a situation where they can plan their work independently, and I think that some great results will come from that independency. So we have our team set up, we have context map defined, each of the team was assigned ownership for each of the bounded contexts, and the team started working independently, and we started making decisions independently. This new level of autonomy was new for everyone, and we needed some supportive structure here. And that's where the advice process came in.
Yeah, so one of the first tools or practices within the advice process is the architectural principles. So a principle is a core idea that guides how we think, act, or build something. And the way we went about collecting our principles was to first look at our business strategy. So we had a session, a collaborative session, with various experts, SMEs from around the business. We presented the business strategy, and that was then how we shaped our principles. So with a shared understanding across engineering, QA, architecture, we would then create principles that would guide us. They would act as the dotted line and the shape around what we were building. They would also then help us influence our architectural decisions. So they would guide our decision-making. So here are our 16 architectural principles that came out of our workshop. And I'll quickly take you through one. So this is our isolate tenant database. So this is an example principle that we actually use. The first point is clear statement as to what the principle is. Make it super clear that what you're trying to achieve with this principle so that anyone can read it and understand within a few seconds what the principle is defining. We talked about business strategy. So we link our strategic goals from the business strategy to our principles. So we make sure that there's a link back to that business strategy. Again, we want these principles to guide our decision-making. The rationale behind it, so the benefit. Again, this isn't war and peace. This is meant to guide decision-making, and it's meant to be as succinct as possible so that, again, people can consume them quite quickly and also remember them, because that's fairly key. And then the implications. So some principles will have implications. Some of them positive, some of them negative. In this instance, an increased hosting cost because of our approach to tenancy. So just to recap, architectural principles, they help align us to our business strategy. They create a consensus across the team because they're formed by the teams. And then they become the foundation of our decision-making. So the next tool that we're going to talk about is the ADRs, and this is how we go about documenting those decisions.
Yes, the decisions are the core of the software architecture. Practicing software architecture means working with decisions. And also software development is a constant stream of decisions. We have adopted the decentralized decision-making process, and that means that everyone will contribute to the architecture decision. Everyone can make an architecture decision, starting from developer to architect. And Well, for this approach, it's less important who made the decision or how long it took to make the decision. It's more important to identify if the decision is architecturally significant and will impact the system now or in the future. We want those decisions to be recorded, to be shared, and to be asked for advice. Why we want to record the architecture decisions? Because by recording the architecture decisions, you're capturing the why behind every what, and with that you're creating a great context for future learning and sharing understanding. To support the process of the recording the architecture decision, we have introduced architecture decision records, or ADRs. How many of you have heard or used ADRs? Okay, that's quite a lot. But for the one that haven't heard, I will share what are architecture decision records. They are short documents that have a defined format, and they are recording a single architecture decision. And the most importantly, the rationality behind that decision. Each of those documents can have a different format, and I will share the one that we are using it. So each of our ADR have unique identifier and title, that is the decision itself. And we are also recording the author of the architecture decision records. They came mostly from the teams, and it's the team lead that is writing the ADRs. They can be in one of the five statuses: new, draft, proposed, adopted, or supersede. We also have a section to record the decision, and it needs to be the decision itself, short, self-explanatory, in 1 or 3 sentences. So whenever you're just reading the ADR, by reading this section, you will get understanding for the general understanding for what is this ADR about. Section for we are listing the relevant architecture principles, the one that Pete mentioned, and that guide us in the process of making the decision, but also ensuring that our decision is in line with the overall architecture vision. The ADR context, here we are recording the factors that trigger the need of the decision to be made. The alternatives considered, all the options that were considered, the pros and cons for each of them, and why they haven't been the chosen one. And the consequences of the decisions, the positive and negative, the benefits and the downsides from the decision itself. And the most importantly, we have a section to record the advices. So we're recording the advice itself, person who gave the advice, and the date when the advice was given. ADRs are here to support the recording of the architecture decision. But for me, they are most useful because they guide you in the process of making the architecture decision. Because when you're starting firstly with making the architecture decision, you will be struggling and you will not have the confidence to make the decision instantly. So whenever I'm starting whenever I need to make an architecture decision and I don't know from where to start, I'm starting by drafting an ADR. In the context section, I'm reminding myself why the decision is needed and what is the problem that the decision will resolve. And the section after that, I'm going on the option section when I'm listing all the options and the pros and cons for each of them, and also aligning them with the architecture principles. It's also good here whenever you need some additional investigation to do some additional exploration for some of the options. For example, you want to introduce a new technology and you're not sure how that will fit with your existing architecture. You can raise a spike and the teams can do the investigation, they can share the learnings, and you will be more empowered and you will have more confidence to make the decision. Once you are ready, you're making the decision and recording it together with the consequences from it. And it's time to ask for feedback or advice. When to ask for feedback or advice? You can do that before or after deciding. And it depends on the nature of the decision. If you know that the decision will be impactful and will impact a lot of other different parts of the system, or maybe you don't have the knowledge, business or technical knowledge and confidence to making it, it will be better if you ask in the process of making the decision, and in that you will get more knowledge and you will create a better decision. because once you made the decision and change the status of the ADR to adopt it, you cannot change it because the ADRs as documents are immutable. It can happen in practice that you need to change the decision, and if you need to do that, you should change the status of the previous ADR to supersede and create a new ADR with the new decision. And saying that means that the number of ADRs will grow instantly and over the time. So it is really important to keep them centralized and keep them organized so everyone in the company can access them, can be informed, and also can contribute to them. We have started with wiki pages, but moved to work items for better management. And like almost 5 years now, we have created more than 200 ADRs. It's also useful to have a notification system. So for the team channels or for the emails. So whenever someone is creating a new ADR or is updating an existing one, everyone will be notified. ADRs will act like a living document for your documentation for your project, documentation that we all kind of trying to avoid writing it. And it's really important to define the format of the ADR to be in line with your project needs and also to force everyone to follow that format. And for that, you can introduce a template. So we have the ADRs to record the architecture decisions. They guide us in the process of making the decision, but they are most useful when they are shared and when we ask for feedback and advice for them. And we are sharing our architecture decision records on the Architecture Advisory Forum.
So the AAF, the Architectural Advisory Forum, is our weekly meeting. It's open to anyone, so all teams, architects, QAs, SMEs, there's no restrictions on who can join. And we have a set agenda. So the first two parts I'll go through is we have our upcoming spikes. So there's a correlation between spikes that the teams are doing and future decisions. They're sensing out those, they're sensing out the changes, they're looking at the options. So by sharing those upcoming spikes, we give early visibility to all the teams. So again, they can give better feedback when the decision comes, or before the decision comes. And then we have, the next part is the upcoming ADRs. So this is a list of the ADRs that people want to present. So we talked about previously, we get notifications to say that ADRs are coming. Some people read them. Some people may not have had the opportunity. So this is an opportunity just to present them quite quickly and open up for any questions. Two other agenda points that we have. We actually also have our DORA metrics. So at the beginning I mentioned Accelerate and some of the practices that we're using. And we've included the DORA metrics and our Azure spend because we think that both have a correlation with some of the decisions we make. So again, by checking that weekly, we can look at some of the impact of those decisions, whether it's a change in a resource and the cost goes up or the cost goes down if we're lucky. So again, making some of this visible. I think also since this screenshot, we've also added some extra SLO dashboards that we show as well. So that's the advice process. We've got architectural principles which guide our decision making. We have decision records to track the decisions that we make and create a record and a history of that. And then we have our Architectural Advisory Forum where we share those. So let's take a look at our first ADR and give you a bit of a feeling of what that felt like.
Yeah, my team has the opportunity, but also the responsibility to be the first team to make the first individual architecture decision, record it in the first architecture decision records, and share it on the Architecture Advisory Forum and ask for advice. It was quite an experience, so let's take a look how that went. Within the context map, we were assigned for ownership for a line of business context that is quite complex context in our system, in our legacy system that we inherited, and lives somewhere in the middle of the system and has a lot of complex dependencies and relationship with all the other different bounded contexts. What were the challenges that line of business context have in that architecture? We were using a single-tenant monolith desktop tool to create and also manage the line of businesses. And we were also experiencing a lot of quality issues with it. Despite the capabilities of these tools, there were also a lot of limitations, and there was a need of frequent development intervention. But we have a slow lead time, and we were releasing to production really slow because of the nature of the architecture. And also there were a lot of performance bottleneck within this context. How do we see the future? So we introduced the line of business as a microservice with his own data store and default configuration. And with that said, we introduced a deprecation of the existing tool, desktop tool that were used, and that was written by Pete. So we made the decision, we recorded it in the architecture, in the ADR, and we were making a lot of transformative, architecture transformative shift with it. We introduced the line of business as a microservice, and that means that all the principles for microservices will be applying for the line of business also. And one of them is to have a single Azure Cosmos DB for microservice, and with that we introduced a move from one shared SQL database to multiple Azure Cosmos DB. But all the other parts, all the other bounded contexts were still relying and having dependencies on that one single SQL database, and there was need of data synchronization and dual write in order to manage those dependencies and those contracts. But we have a line of business as a microservice, and that means that it will be independently deployable and scalable unit, and will improve the lead time, and we will release into a production in a short time. We made the decision, we recorded it on the first ADR, and that was quite new for everyone and bring a lot of challenges and a lot of emotion for everyone in the company, but mostly for me and Pete, as we were kind of leading the process, but from different perspective. So for me, at the beginning, when I was doing the first architecture decision, I was quite excited, because I think that every engineer that we have the power to work with architecture and be empowered to make architecture decisions will feel the same. I was kind of feeling that I'm doing shopping and everything is on sale, and I wanted to try everything. I wanted to introduce every new technology and every new architecture style that I have read. But on another side, I was aware that that was quite a big responsibility, and there were a lot of things that needed to be decided, a lot of options that needed to be made. I was quite aware of the impact of the decision, because the line of business was complex context, and I was quite aware that we will impact a lot of parts of the system and a lot of teams, and we will need a lot of conversation with the affected parts in order to understand the dependencies and resolve them. And I also remember that I contacted Pete in that time, and I was kind of hoping that he will give me the right direction. He will kind of help me to choose what is the preferred option, what is the best option, but he didn't do that. We just go through all the existing options. We go through the pros and cons of each of them, and he led me and my team to make the final decision. But how that felt, Pete? How you feel to not be the one who is making the decision, but also not be the one who is influencing the decision?
So I've said this a few times. I felt like the first test driver in a Tesla with autopilot on. I took my hands off the wheel, and I was just praying that I wasn't going to crash into anything. And as the person that was responsible for the program of work and across those three teams, it's kind of scary. It's definitely, we all have our opinion of how we would do this. Partly, I was biased by the fact that, as Elena mentioned earlier, the tool that she was replacing, I originally wrote, and I thought it was still pretty good. So I was, again, biased on that, and I think it was a lot of work to stay out of the decision. And in actual reflection, I probably stayed out more than I needed to. I think I was over-indexing on not leading the witness. But I didn't want to undermine the advice process, and this is something Andrew and I talked about a lot, and it was kind of keeping our powder dry, not reacting to some of these decisions, and it's hard. But it was going to work. I was convinced it was going to work, and then I was distracted by all the messages that started to come in. So everyone got the Teams notifications to say there was a new ADR, and everyone had an opinion on the new ADR. So I started to get messages, but it's not my responsibility anymore. So I was trying to not respond, but push them and channel them back to Elena and Barry, who was her pair. So all these messages I was just kind of pushing back on and just saying, look, you need to take this to the ADR, you need to give comments on the ADR, or go along to AAF. And I think those messages continued on AAF.
Yeah, we practicing the advice process, and we shared our ADR on the Architecture Advisory Forum. And it was a short presentation, 10 minutes, but I think that the meeting itself was really long. I think it may be an hour and more, because there were a lot of questions. It was a dynamic discussion, and we were introducing a big change, and it was a big decision. Everyone had their opinion, and that was really great, because that was one of the reasons why we are sharing the ADR. But it was hard to follow everyone and to understand their views and their feedback. And in order to make them to practice the advice process, we asked people if they can leave their feedback and advice in the section for the advice on the ADR itself. And they did that, and this is just some of the feedback or the advices that we received. They are quite massive one. Yeah, there was a lot of different opinions, and we continued the conversation offline. We did the conversation with the people who give the advice and try to understand their views and consider their feedback. And I must say that there were a lot of feedback and advices that were from people that were kind of strongly disagree with the approach. But on the other side, there were people who liked the idea, but challenging it and also shared their concerns about it. And this feedback kind of made me rethink my decision. I was constantly questioning myself, is this the right one? Should we change the approach? There were a couple of other options that we can choose it, but my team and myself, we didn't change the decision. We changed the ADR to the status adapted, and the team started to implement the decisions itself. And reflecting now on that first ADR, I will say that for this one particularly, we missed a stronger connection to the product vision. Because we were not doing only architecture decision with this ADR, we also did some product decision, and we introduced a product change. And not everyone included in the advice process were aware for the overall product vision. And with that, they weren't able to give us more effective feedback that will help us in making our decision better and more in line with the product vision. And after this first ADR, we started writing a product decision records and link them with the ADRs, but for the ADRs that there was a need. And given what I know now, I will probably not do the same approach. I would do a more iterative approach. I would try to do more smaller decisions, create a multiple ADRs, and ask for feedback from them, and that will give me more flexibility and will enable me to receive a most faster feedback, and probably will lead to a more better decision-making process. And something that became a practice for me now is to try to get more advices during the decision-making process. Not waiting and asking for advice or feedback on the Architecture Advisory Forum itself. Do that while you are in the process of making the decision. Collaborate and ask advice and feedback from the teams that are affected from your decision, or the people that can help you with their domain knowledge, business knowledge, or technical knowledge. But make sure that you are receiving advice or feedback and you are not receiving an opinion. Because most of the people will try to kind of influence with their opinions, and they can try to convince you that their option or their opinion is the best. So you need to make a practice to distinguish between the advice and the opinion. And we continue, after this first ADR, we continue practicing the advice process. My team continued writing an ADR, also the other teams did that. And let's look how the practicing of advice process looked in the past and how it looks now.
So, it's a bit of a roller coaster. And I think that what I've seen is that there's 4 distinct phases that new people, new teams. So since having 3 teams, we've gone to 6. So we've added new teams into the mix. And they all seem to go through kind of 4 phases. And I'll walk you through and just explain those. So the first one is when they don't realize they can make a decision. So they're so used to being told what the decision is that they don't think they can. So they're going, are you sure we can do this? Are we okay to do this? Do you approve of this? So we still hear the language that is, they're still seeking someone to give it the rubber stamp, and it's not coming. Like Andrew and I had to talk to each other a few times about, go into a dark room and go, right, we're not approving anything. Pete, don't use the language. So we had to hold strong so that we could break this kind of Stockholm syndrome. We can move away from us making decisions and the teams making decisions. And as soon as they realized that, it came to life, right? And we saw the decisions start to flow. So they were looking at new technology, new frameworks, new libraries, new practices, new patterns, and it was exciting. The process came to life. We were excited. We could see it happening, and there was a lot of energy around it. And then we moved into the next stage, which is where the teams, and much like us as architects have been through this, we start to feel the impact of our decisions. So as Elena mentioned, it was quite a big decision, the first one. There was probably a lot more in that decision than perhaps you would make now. And I think this is where the teams start to realize. And that's okay, right? Because we've all been through it. We've all made good and bad decisions, but it's definitely a trend that they go through. And then the system starts to correct itself, and it starts to work. You're in the sunny uplands. Teams are holding each other to account, so they're questioning the decisions, they're giving feedback on the decisions, they're searching out feedback, and actually, teams are bringing well thought out ADRs to the Architectural Advisory Forum. So what we now see is that the teams are providing the guardrails for new teams joining, for new people joining, and we're in a better place. And I guess, from your perspective, Elena, how do you feel about?
Yeah. So why you should do this? Because it will improve the trust and transparency. Teams will need to be trusted that they will make the right decision. Maybe not always they will do the right decision, but they need the trust that they will do everything to make the best decision according to the consequences and the situation in which they are. And also they need also to promote transparency, to share their decisions, transparency, to ask for advice and ask for feedback from them. Also, it will help you to have a better alignment between teams. Even I mentioned that the teams will work independently and they will build the ownership for their bounded context, the architectural principles, and will guide them to follow the overall architecture vision, and teams need to be reminded, and they will be reminded, that they are working on the same product at the end. They don't need to work in silos. They are working on the same product, but they are only making a decision about their context. And this decentralized decision-making will lead to more stronger architecture decisions, because they will be more collaborative one, and they will be shared, and they will be really better. it will support also the fast flow team will start work independently and they will start work faster. But what about the architects?
So I should have probably asked, how many architects are actually here? Okay, well, your jobs are safe. So we're not, you thought AI was coming after your jobs. Now you thought slime mold and engineers were coming after your job. That's not the case. Teams still need support. They don't have some of the experience that you have. You can also help them with facilitation. So things like event storming, threat modeling, risk storming, all of these exercises and workshops, they still need support and a perspective on. You're also the conduit between the teams. So when you can see a decision being taken in a team and perhaps another team hasn't spotted it, you can then act as that conduit to support the knowledge and information flow between teams. And you can get involved in the gnarly problems, so the really interesting ones. So you've freed your time up to actually get more involved with some of the ones that excite you, the problems that excite you, and you can support, again, the teams in solving those problems. If you'd like to learn more, and Andrew's already talked about his book, check out this book. It is awesome, only because I mentioned in it, but also because of the content. And I'm going to leave you on one thing. Be more slime mold. Empower your teams, decentralize your decision-making, and achieve your shared goals. Any questions?
Go, go, go. Ask questions. Sorry, wait for the microphone, then ask questions. They're coming, they're coming.
Hello, thank you for the talk. That was very interesting and insightful. I was just wondering, after you'd created all of your architectural decision records, how many times do you actually go back and look at them again? And something that we've sort of struggled with is how do you organize those things so that it's easy to find the record that correlates to whatever the thing is, 1 year later that you're trying to make another decision about, and you think, oh, there was something in the past a couple of years ago that probably relates to this, but I can't remember what it was called and where it is and all the rest.
That is one of the benefits from the ADRs itself. They also will become a shared documentation for your project. And I have mentioned that we are keeping ours in the repository. So they are work items, and by just searching them, you can review them and find them. And it's easy because we are using Azure DevOps, and you can just search as any other work item. And it's really important to each of the team to be encouraged to do that, because they will learn from the previous ADRs, and they will learn from mistakes from some of them, and also from successes from some of them.
And I think one of the first things you do is you do search those ADRs to see if there's one that aligns with what you're thinking, because one of the benefits of the ADR is it will show the pros and cons and alternatives. So it does some of the research for you. So if you're thinking about using a service and another team's already used it, you can kind of stand on the shoulder of giants and look at what they've already done.
Do you keyword tagging those things?
We use Azure DevOps, so it's really easy to search. So we don't need to. But again, the title's fairly clear, but you can search the entire content. So.
Hi there. We use ADRs quite a lot. I'm just wondering how many of those gnarly problems that you spoke about are down to decisions you didn't agree with?
Oh. So there's lots of ways to solve problems. How do I answer this one? This one's a good one.
You can blame me. I took some help take some of the early decisions. You can blame me.
So I guess the problem is until you find that problem, you don't know what the cause is. I actually don't think I think I could sit there smugly and say, well, I would have done it slightly differently, but I still don't know the full outcome of that decision until it materializes. So until I've actually made a different decision and then followed it all the way through, I don't really know. So I think you just have to accept that It's a different path that was taken. But then you've also got the opportunity to feedback, right? And if you didn't give the feedback, then I would reflect on yourself as to, well, you could have given better feedback at the time. Maybe you need to think about the way you're positioning the teams. Maybe that's why they didn't take your advice at the time. So maybe, look back on yourself and go, well, maybe I could have shared a bit more information or some more context or some examples. So yeah, I use that to reflect and try and make myself feel better about the decision.
But isn't that influencing the decision?
It is influencing the decision, absolutely, but they don't have to, they can choose to take that advice or not. So if you truly believe something and you explain it well, then it will be based on fact, right? And therefore, they'll deal with facts when they're making the decision.
You mentioned you're using this process with 6 teams right now, and maybe this is answered in the book, but have you thought about how you'd scale it up to 15 teams or 50 teams across a bigger organization?
Have I thought about it? I don't know. Andrew might have thought
I
about it.
have thought about it.
Oh, okay. Do you can answer this one?
Sorry, this bit. So it doesn't. So everyone asks, how does it scale? But you can see it's maybe where Pete and Elena are getting to now. It scales to a certain point, and then the social, the human being bit doesn't scale, and then you can kind of have like a modular way of doing it. And there's because there were other bits of where Pete and Elena work who wanted to adopt this, but we didn't make them follow the same. They had different principles, I think. They had different architecture advice for them, and then I think it's joined together since. But like they were separate, doing separate programs of work, so they could be cross-fertilizing. But
yeah, that's true. Sorry, we do have other teams that are doing ADRs and AAF. They're all visible, so we can search them, but they'll run their own AAF because it's not necessarily relevant to the other teams. I think when we start to bring them closer, then we merge that into a single AAF and make sure that everyone's attending the same one.
I've got one here. So I was just curious, are there any sort of highly impactful kind of paradigm-shifting decisions that you would not trust to a team to decide using this process? And if so, how do you identify those?
They're all still decisions. I think, at the end of the day, it comes back to, I'm still an architect, there's a bunch of other architects who are on the AAF. You still have to share your experience with them. I think our principles guide most of the decision making, so I don't think I've come across one. We haven't had anyone go, right, we're all in Azure, let's shift to AWS, as an example. So we haven't had that. If that came along, well, they'd have to have a pretty good reason to move to AWS, and the ADR would have to reflect that. So.
Thanks.
I have a question. At the beginning of your presentation, you show the context map with all the bounded context. And you said one of the first things you did is assign ownership.
Yeah.
What was the decision criteria to assign ownership? I assume you don't have 20,000 teams. So what did you use to assign ownership to teams?
Firstly, we identified that loosely coupled services within our system, and we try to map them with the business flow. So they can have like kind of story. And for each of that business flow, we have a team that was responsible for it. And having ownership for the business flow means that you're also having ownership for all the bounded contexts that are within that business flow.
And I think one of the other parts is we would bring in, so if we had engineers that were already experienced in that area, we would then pair them, or we would use our enabling team and the SMEs there to support that team in understanding that bounded context. And we have reviewed the context map and ownership a couple of times and changed the ownership because of that experience. If came up that some of the team will be a better owner for that context, we were reassigning the ownership, if needed.
Unfortunately, we've run out of time. So thank you, everybody.